Hello, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Today's episode is titled, A Society Lost in Fantasy. I've been finding social media increasingly difficult to tolerate. I originally liked it because it allowed me to stay informed and keep up with current events. But the more time I spend on it, the more I realize how much of it is driven by misinformation, exaggeration, and emotional reactions rather than facts. Every day, people seem willing to distort reality over things that have little or no impact on their lives. When people are comfortable being dishonest about small, insignificant matters, it naturally raises questions about how reliable they are when discussing issues that actually matter. It creates an environment where truth becomes secondary to attention, and where narratives often matter more than reality. One of the biggest problems I see is that people become emotionally invested in stories, controversies, and scenarios that often aren't even real. Entire debates can consume millions of people despite being based on speculation, rumors, or assumptions. People end up arguing passionately about situations that may never happen or were never actually under consideration in the first place. What follows is predictable. Different groups divide into opposing camps, spend days arguing, and become emotionally invested in outcomes that were never grounded in reality. By the time the truth emerges, most people have already moved on to the next controversy. The cycle repeats itself over and over again. At some point, you begin to realize that much of what dominates online discussion is not genuine information, but manufactured outrage. People react to headlines, screenshots, edited clips, and carefully selected narratives rather than taking the time to understand the full context of a situation. This extends into politics as well. Disagreement is normal and healthy. People should challenge leaders, policies, and ideas whenever they believe it is necessary. The problem arises when people completely abandon the principles they previously claimed to stand for. It is difficult to take someone's convictions seriously when those convictions seem to change based on convenience, public pressure, or shifting political winds. Consistency matters. If someone spends years warning about a particular ideology, movement, or political party, then suddenly begins defending the very things they previously condemned without any meaningful explanation, people are naturally going to question their credibility. It creates the impression that principles were never the motivating factor to begin with. A lot of what we're seeing today appears to be driven by fear. People look at changing political landscapes, shifting public opinion, and uncertain futures, and they begin adjusting their positions accordingly. Rather than standing by what they believe, they attempt to position themselves wherever they think power will exist in the future. That isn't conviction. It's self-preservation. Throughout history, many people have claimed to hold strong beliefs until those beliefs carried a cost. The true test of principles isn't whether you hold them when they're popular. The test is whether you hold them when they're unpopular, inconvenient, or potentially damaging to your own interests. What frustrates me most is watching people spend every day contributing to narratives they claim to oppose. They may insist they aren't supporting a particular outcome, but if all of their time is spent amplifying negative stories, repeating questionable claims, and encouraging distrust in their own side, then their actions ultimately contribute to outcomes they claim not to want. The internet has made this problem worse because it rewards emotion over thoughtfulness. Outrage spreads faster than facts. Sensational claims receive more attention than careful analysis. People are encouraged to react instantly rather than think critically. After years of watching this happen, it becomes exhausting. At a certain point, you begin to question whether spending hours every day consuming online arguments is actually productive. You start asking whether there is any value in constantly exposing yourself to negativity, outrage, and conflict. What makes it even more frustrating is the overall level of discourse. Serious conversations often become impossible because so many people approach every topic as entertainment rather than discussion. Nuance disappears. Complex issues are reduced to slogans. Every disagreement becomes a battle between teams rather than an opportunity to learn something. Increasingly, I find myself wanting thoughtful conversations about ideas, consequences, and long-term outcomes. Instead, much of what exists online feels superficial and repetitive. The same arguments occur over and over again, with very little growth or understanding taking place. Many people seem highly vulnerable to propaganda, regardless of which side it comes from. They adopt opinions with very little skepticism, repeat talking points without examining them, and allow emotional appeals to shape their worldview. Watching this happen repeatedly can be frustrating because the patterns become obvious once you've seen them enough times. Perhaps the most disappointing realization is that many people aren't actually interested in discussion at all. They want validation, they want conflict, they want entertainment, they want to provoke reactions, but they don't necessarily want understanding. This becomes especially obvious in online communities where trolling, attention-seeking, and disruption become the primary forms of interaction. What may seem amusing for a short period eventually becomes repetitive and tiresome. When every conversation turns into the same joke, the same performance, or the same attempt to provoke a reaction, meaningful engagement becomes impossible. The irony is that people often believe they are influencing others when in reality they are simply making themselves easier to ignore. Repetition eventually loses its effect. Predictable behavior stops being interesting. What once might have been provocative becomes boring. Boredom is often misunderstood. People assume disengagement means someone has been defeated, offended, or emotionally affected. In reality, sometimes people simply lose interest. There's a difference between being upset and recognizing that something no longer provides value. As I've gotten older, I've become increasingly aware of how much time is wasted on things that contribute nothing meaningful to life. Endless arguments, endless drama, endless attempts to provoke reactions. None of it leads anywhere productive. At some point, maturity requires evaluating the people you surround yourself with. A useful question is whether you would willingly spend time with someone in real life. If the answer is no, it may be worth reconsidering why you're spending so much time interacting with them online. The internet often encourages relationships and interactions that would never exist in the real world. People tolerate behavior online that they would immediately avoid in person. Over time, that disconnect becomes difficult to ignore. Ultimately, I've come to believe that many people would benefit from spending less time immersed in online culture and more time focused on reality. Real relationships, meaningful work, personal growth, family, community, and genuine experiences provide far more value than endless participation in online conflict. Stepping away from that environment isn't surrender. It isn't defeat. In many cases, it's simply recognizing that your time and attention are too valuable to spend on things that no longer contribute anything meaningful to your life. This concludes this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Thank you for listening. Signing out. Goodbye for now.